Welcome to Beans and Breakdowns, a podcast dedicated to bridging the gap between specialty coffee and the heavy music community. On this episode, I'm joined by Sonny Adamski of Have Fun Coffee. So grab a fresh cup of coffee and wake the fuck up! What's going on, caffeinated crew? Today I'm joined by Sonny. He's the founder. You're founder and owner of Have Fun.
Yeah, co-founder. Me and my brother started it together.
So, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy to have. I've told this to Keegan. I know you know the Botfly boys. They're the ones that really made the intro. I love them. I love pretty much anyone I've ever talked to who's from Atlantic Canada. So I'm very excited today to speak with not just an Atlantic Canadian, but a coffee roaster from that region. So I'm excited to get into it. But first, let's talk about what you're drinking.
Yeah. So right now I'm actually drinking a new coffee that we just released from a producer named Pastor Ordonez. He's a Huila-based producer in Colombia. This is actually our second time bringing him in. Previously, we had his pink raw varietal that was super, super gorgeous, really, really nice. But this is his red Caturra. So we buy this through our pals in Montreal, actually, a company called Semilla. So they do like importing from Rwanda, Colombia, Guatemala. And so we work with them for a lot of our Colombian coffees because they just have a really cool program down there that's like bringing up a lot of amazing producers. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Pastor is one of those. He's rad. He's like in his late 50s. He's been producing coffee since he's 18 years old. He's just like a legend on the scene and really highly respected. And like he used to be like one of the OG members of a producer group called Los Noreños, which was like one of the initial like Colombian small producers kind of grouping together to like push their coffee into specialty. And he's only recently stepped away from them and started producing coffee under his own name and selling it as microlots, and kind of like has like big aspirations to be like a recognized like household, well, like not household, but you know, like a recognized name for high quality coffee. And the stuff he does is amazing. And he does it all in one leg too, which is wild. He has only one leg with a crutch, and it's just insane to think about having to produce coffee like that.
Yeah, I was looking on the site and I saw the Pastor Ordonez.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, he's only got one leg and he's like walking all over a coffee plantation.
Yeah,
which
dude.
is crazy.
It's wild. And yeah, like yeah, it's just wild. So I don't know how he does it, but then like the coffee he makes is just so clean. It's even one of those coffees like I was like, oh, maybe it's just a pink ball thing. And then when I have this, I'm just like, no, like it just roasts super easily. Like there's some coffees you're like, you really got to be fickle with. And like, but then like some coffees, it's just like going down a slide and it's just clean and easy. And I'm just like, this is perfect. This is great. I can do whatever I want to it. And his coffees are one of those, probably just like, you know, something with processing and moisture content, but I love it.
Yeah. I have something weird, not in terms of taste, but in terms of, I don't know who made this coffee. So I had a friend give this to me. He runs a roaster called Balam Sacred Coffee in Montreal. And he gave me, it's like a friend of his or something that basically is from here, but has family in Guatemala and has like family farms or a farm that they've been growing on for like 3 or 4 generations. So he wanted to start bringing the coffee and roasting it. But it's called Alyssa Coffee.
Okay.
The only thing I could find online of theirs was like a Square site, like a Square point of sale site, but it has like information on this coffee. But this is their, it's the Monteverde. It's an anaerobic honey. I've never seen this variety before. A Tequisic.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar either.
I have no idea. And then we're looking for like grapefruit berries, some like citrusy tea and caramel in the cup. I would say it's like definitely more funky than a lot of the Guatemalans that would be like washed on the more traditional side. but it's not like overly funky from the anaerobic like honey processed.
Nice.
So it's a nice little morning drinker.
That's good. Yeah, I wonder if that's the same Balam. There's like a green coffee like importer named Balam out of Montreal, Sebastian, who I've actually just
That's
talked to
it.
recently. Yeah.
That's
Okay,
him.
sweet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
him.
So I met him in Montreal. Like I was just there like 3 weeks ago. So I met him at Apex, which is another coffee importer. And so we were just chatting on Instagram like 2 days ago. So he's actually sending me a bunch of samples of the Guatemala stuff, including the anaerobic stuff. Like it's all like a
Okay.
cold anaerobic process. Sounds really cool.
I remember when I just found he did his first batch and put it up in Origin, which is like the shop that he runs. He had done like it wasn't the weirdest coffee, but I think it was still a geisha that he had put out.
Okay.
But the second run that he did, he like changed the branding a bit, and he's been trying to grow the Instagram, I think, a bit more as well. And it was like a competition series, anaerobic. No, it was double anaerobic, like geisha. It was a Panamanian grown in Guatemala. It was super strange,
Yeah.
but it's definitely ranked as like one of the like top probably five best coffees I've ever had.
Sick.
And
Yeah.
it's cool to know that it's just like he brings it from like his family and like
Yeah.
just roast it, and it's pretty unpretentious everything that he's doing, which I really like. It's very accessible, and it wasn't even like crazy expensive.
Yeah. That's like you find sometimes those people have those connections and you can get like really, really cool, like high value coffees. Like the guy I work with for my El Salvador's, Matthias, like he came from El Salvador, is living in Canada now, and he's importing coffee from El Salvador that from his like family's farms. And like they're just really, really nice, like classic El Sal profiles. And then they have a few kind of like funkier ones too that are like natural and honey process. And it's just really cool. It's a really nice experience. Like, and he's like super stoked on it too. He's always like, every time I chat, he's like, you got to come down to El Salvador this year. He's like, you got to come and see the farms. I'm like, fuck yeah, let's go. So it's cool when you get to meet those people who like really bridge the gap and like uh, open up those potentials for like more direct relationships and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes coffee, even on our end of like buying coffee as roasters, can be very like hands off and like you're like, okay, like I got all these coffee samples. Like, I like this coffee. Can I learn more? And they're like, here's a tech sheet on it. You're like, oh, like, can you tell me anything more? They're like, no. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe I won't buy this coffee then because I'm just like, if this is all you have for me, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you have people like that. They're like, oh yeah, that's my uncle's farm. It's sick, and
Yeah.
like you're just like, yeah, this is what I'm about. Let's go.
Yeah, like it's really fun. Like I might have to send you the link to the site that I found for this coffee because it's like this coffee was grown on my wife's uncle's farm, which was originally his like great great grandfather's,
Yeah,
and like it tells you like the shading, like which trees are shading the lot. Like it's very crazy.
that's so cool.
And it
Yeah,
gives you like a whole rundown of like the trees grow to 50 years old, and then we start to harvest. Like it's very hands on, but it's presented in like the weirdest sight. So I feel
that's
like
funny.
I feel like there's a lot of like great coffees and producers and stuff, but then sometimes like they kind of get lost in like the social jungle, right? So like trying to break through and become accessible like in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Which is why I really like Dispatch from Montreal,
Yep.
because I feel like they're one of the OGs in the city that started like very deeply transparent like
Oh yeah.
stories of each coffee.
Yeah. They're like it's funny too with Dispatch, like they're OG in Canada. Like I feel like they popped up like probably third or fourth, like kind of like of that specialty realm. And I remember I actually, so like 8 years ago, I used to buy their coffee for the dairy bar that I run in Halifax. So it's like a little ice cream shop. You have an espresso machine.
Mm-hmm.
And when I launched that, I was like, sick, like I can buy whatever coffee I want. I'm like, I'm going to get Dispatch. And, uh, and I was bringing it in. It's so good, but I was like, gosh, it's so expensive.
It's
Like,
so
like
expensive.
so expensive. But it's funny. Like their prices, they have gone up, but their prices honestly haven't changed that much. And you see this with a few roasters that have always kind of been expensive back then, but now they're like average now, where it's just like, oh, they were just like always paying good prices for their coffee and always kind of putting that forward. And now everyone else is kind of catching up because they've had to because general coffee prices have gone up. But yeah, Dispatch. OG, really, really good coffees and like, yeah, really good like sourcing, I think, from my
It's
perspective.
definitely like between them and Zab, I think that they are probably the two biggest that are always like emailing, putting up stories like,
Yeah.
we're so excited about this new coffee. This is the story of this coffee. Like I think I get one a month from Zab,
Yeah.
which
Oh
is
yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Um,
I love the Zap guys. We actually we the roaster that I roast on is Zap's old coffee roaster. So I bought their Pro Bat from them. I've known Edwin back again like 10 years. I used to roast for Anchored Coffee back
mhm.
like the first couple of years there, and so we used to roast for their cafes before they started their own roastery. And so like I ran into Edwin like 5 years ago, just before COVID. I was in Montreal for a coffee event. He's like, you're Sonny, right? Like he's like, oh yeah, you used to roast for Anchored. Like, oh no. And so we caught up, and that kind of like reformed that relationship of like then when I was looking to buy a roaster, heard they were getting their Lorians, and so they were selling that, and got to kind of chat with them. I was like, it's so weird how those things mix up, but it's like, yeah. So I love the Zap crew, and yeah.
They're probably the only roaster in Montreal that has Loring's.
St. Henri has Lorians now too. They just upgraded. And then PS has a Lorian as well, but I think they just bought a Probat. But there's a few of them around.
I PS is like, I don't know if I've had a coffee that they do this. They do the restaurant thing, right?
Yeah, so their roastery for a long time was in the back of Elena, I believe. The
Yeah,
not
yeah.
Elena, the other restaurant.
Underneath like the social club or whatever, right?
Yeah,
In St. Henry.
yeah, yeah. But they had a little S7 Lorien there for a long time, and then I think they still do the roasting there, but they moved their production. So the cool thing with PS is that they're Samia. So it's Brandon and Pat are the same guys that do Samia, that do the importing, that do PS.
Oh,
So it's kind of that cool, like, yeah, that's kind of a cool relationship they have because they bring coffee that they roast themselves, but then they also like sell to other roasters.
okay.
So that's kind of like the fun thing. So like, for example, Paso Ordones is a coffee that's imported by Semilla slash PS via Moncaba, which is like the Colombian exporter.
Okay. I
Yeah.
had never dug into them much because every time I saw PS, it was like they roasted coffee for a restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah. They're, I don't know all their relationships, but they do like La Finca, for example. All of Finca's coffees are roasted by PS.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I know Big Trouble, which is like, I have a lot of friends that frequent it's Turbo House's like restaurant and coffee shop. Um, and I have never been over there, but usually if I do, somebody brings me traffic instead of like their house blend. So,
Yeah. I
which
love traffic. Jesse's
everybody loves,
hilarious.
everybody loves traffic.
So
Like
funny.
they're sick. I can talk about Montreal roasters all
Yeah.
day, but
We're getting specific.
that's
Yeah.
not why we're here. Tell me about your life changing cup.
My life changing cup. Okay. So I've worked in the coffee industry for a long ass time. Like since I was 15 years old, I got my first job at like a Starbucks in the airport. And I was just like, yeah, this will be cool. My sister was like the manager. My brother worked there. And so it was like a whole family operation. But eventually like got into specialty coffee when I was like 17 years old and and just worked that for a long time. Got over it and I quit my initial like cafe job. I was like, like I don't think I want to work in this industry anymore. Just like it's kind of burning me out, stuff like that. Went on a trip to Arizona and was just like hanging around and found this like really cool cafe called Cartel Coffee Labs, and had like an El Salvadorian coffee from them that just kind of blew my mind. It was like, again, this was like, however many 12 years ago or so. And so like, there weren't very many like naturals. There wasn't a lot of processing stuff going on. There wasn't a lot of people doing like pour overs and stuff like that. This cafe was super cool. They had a whole pour over menu. They had a ton of different varietals that they all roasted themselves. And I just remember like getting in a Chemex of this El Salvador coffee and like the baristas like being stoked that I picked it and like brewing it up for me, bringing it over and just like tasting like blueberries and like being so vibrant. And I was just like, this is so cool. Like I didn't know coffee could taste like this. And we were having good coffee back then at the cafe. We brought in like 49th Parallel and Phil and Sebastian, but it's like this was like uniquely different. I swear, like when I think about it now, I'm like, it must have been a natural, but they were like, no, it's a washed coffee. And so but yeah, that was kind of one of the ones that I always remember as like my like peak like that was a really cool experience that like when I was like leaving the coffee industry as a young person was like, well, maybe it is cool. Maybe we can do it different in Nova Scotia and like try to do something that's like similar to this, where it's like we're not just like, putting out the same thing. We can do something unique. So yeah, that Alsal have been chased. I don't remember the region or the varietal. I just remember it was an Alsal at Cartel Coffee Labs in like circa 2010. I don't know,
Damn.
2012. Yeah.
So anybody from Cartel listening, I have no idea. I'm sure it's a long shot, but if you were there 10 years ago, what was that El Salvador?
Yeah. Scottsdale location, I think. Yeah.
So the scene like in Nova Scotia, like in terms of coffee, because mentioned Anchored and Receiver. When I think of like Canadian specialty coffee, because I'm originally from the States, I kind of knew 49th Parallel when I moved here.
Yep.
Because they're kind of like the counterculture of, or even like Blue Bottle, I guess, of Canada.
Yeah, or Stumptown.
Yeah, Stumptown would be a good one. I always think Blue Bottle because they were like the first one that everybody was talking about, like
right
on the East Coast. And then I'd heard about Phil and Sebastian about a year after I moved, because I was in Toronto. But in Montreal, there's really only one shop that carries Phil and Sebastian. It's My Little Cup.
Okay.
But I would go into like different shops and see like all kinds of roasters, and I was like, who the hell are all these people? Because back home, usually you it's like counterculture or like intelligentsia,
Yeah.
or the stump towns and things. So on the East Coast, was it always that as well? Was it always those two? And then like within the past maybe 5-6 years, it's been an upcropping of more, or was it always more of like the mom and pop style?
I would say, yeah, like for the longest time, most cafes just like sold Java Blend would have been our big like kind of like wholesaler in Nova Scotia, and pretty much just everyone brought them in. In terms of specialty cafes, like when I was first getting into the coffee scene here, we only like the cafe that's attached to Anchored to If I See was like the only specialty coffee scene or a specialty cafe in that regards that was importing coffee, for the exception of Steve Reno's, which was bringing in 49th Parallel. So like, yeah, like I'd say like back when I first started, it was just like we were the only people really doing that here, and then everyone else was basically just selling Java Blend or yeah, like another, like we have a couple other local coffee roasteries that have propped up. But yeah, and then recently you see a lot more like, even like I'd say like, Anchor never really sold a lot to local cafes. It's still mostly Java Blend, and a few. North Mountain popped up, who was originally the head roaster of Just Us, like the coffee co-op here. So Austin started North Mountain. He's taken over a lot of different cafes and has done he did some really cool stuff in the beginning, like with his transparent sourcing and stuff like that. But yeah, so I feel like it's always kind of in Nova Scotia been like a lot of Java Blend, a lot of North Mountain. And then now we're like our roastery is taking over a few like specialty cafes, which have been really good. And we have a few places that are like bringing coffee in from other places. Like you can find Detour here. You can find Subtext, Pilot,
Subtext
and
fan.
Propeller. Oh, dude, yeah, those guys are sick.
Huge Subtext fan.
Yeah, I love those guys. Yeah, so like I feel like and obviously Good Luck My Cafe, like we're like probably the biggest multi roaster in Nova Scotia, which is something we've kept up. So like even though we roast our own coffee, like I've always made it a point of like we're still bringing in everyone else's coffee. Like, and I remember too when I bought the roaster from Edwin at Zab, he made the joke. He's like, oh, it's like it was nice being featured, but like we'll be sad that we won't be in Good Luck anymore. I was like, oh no, dude, I'll still bring you guys in. He's like, no, you won't. And so, I had a few people really like those remarks, like, "Oh, it's too bad that like Good Luck won't be a multi roaster anymore." I'm like, "No, it will be." They're like, "Once you start selling your own coffee, you won't want to bring other people's in," and no, so I've made it a really good point because like at other places I worked, like you in the wine industry again to bring it back to that is like there's something called cellar palate where it's like if you're only ever drinking your own wine, you're gonna like think your wine's the shit
Yeah.
and it might not be. And so, like if you only drink your own coffee, you have nothing really to compare it to. Not
Hmm.
that you should be like always being like, oh yeah, my coffee's better than this one, but it's not like, but it just like lets you see what other people are doing and like it's why I love the coffee industry. One is like the variation of coffee you can bring in, but then I love seeing like the same coffee done different ways by different people, or like, you know, if I have like my standard filter coffee and I source this Guatemalan and roast it this way, and that's my ideal. I love to see what somebody else's ideal filter coffee is.
Hmm.
And so I still love the idea of being a multi roaster at Cafe Good Luck and bringing in everyone else. And that's something we're not going to really stop. Yeah, so I think like with that, like the scene in Nova Scotia has still expanded a lot, but it's still very like classic. Like people like their Timmies and like darker roast coffees and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
but like there's definitely a more of a younger sect of people that are like more engaged into the coffee industry and want more and stuff like that. So that's been really nice to see.
Is there, so I've talked with like Liam from Cancer Bats before as well, because he lives in Dartmouth.
Yeah.
And obviously like the Botfly guys, Pale Ache guys. So is there like still a good bit of like that core kind of like artisan, I guess would be what it's called? Because a lot of people I've met that live in Montreal from the East Coast have moved because it's become very expensive, especially in Halifax, to live there.
Yeah.
So are a lot of like the younger crowd like that moving to like more affordable places, and are y'all losing, or is it still kind of people sustaining and trying to maintain that?
I mean, there's definitely been a lot of people who've moved away, but I like it's a small percentage. I'd say like
Okay.
I'd say we still have a pretty solid population of young artistic people around here.
Good.
And I mean, yeah, like especially in the music scene it's kind of been popping up really good recently. I'd say like I think especially with more venues kind of like focusing on that again. And so yeah, it's definitely changed here a lot in the past few years, but I don't think we've had a huge mass exodus.
Good. um I'm excited because I've never been farther than, I guess, like Dunham or Sherbrooke in Quebec.
Right.
But in March we're going with Pale Lake. We're doing the Maritimes kind of
Sick.
run. Very, very excited. And it's not even like to play the shows. It's just because it gives me a reason to go
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
try the food and the coffee and hang out with friends.
Yeah. That'll be sick. I mean, you'll have to come by the roastery and we'll cup some coffees and mess
Oh
around.
yeah. Oh yeah. I really appreciate this. That you're keeping Good Luck a multi roaster. One of my like biggest pet peeves is my favorite multi roaster coffee shop starts roasting coffee, and then it's I can only buy their coffee.
Yeah.
And so they stop selling Subtext and Ethica and, all of my favorite Ontario roasters, or, they stop bringing in like Intelligentsia or things like that. So I really, really appreciate, and this isn't even to get more on this. It's just to say like, thank you very much for keeping that collaborative attitude in coffee, because it can become oversaturated and you
Yeah.
can only drink these people's coffee at your favorite shop. And as a consumer, it's very, very frustrating. And as somebody who has wanted to roast or get into the coffee industry independently, that's a big fear of mine. Because it's like, if I just start drinking my own roasted coffee, am I going to like, be turned off to drinking somebody else's? I don't really want to
Yeah.
be that way.
No, no, I don't feel like I feel like maybe some coffees will become less charming to you. Like there'll be certain coffees that will be like, oh, like I don't need to drink this one because I know exactly what to expect after.
Right.
But you get that way anyway as like a consumer. But yeah, even at the roastery, it's like, we cup our own coffee so often. Like, we do cuppings like bi-weekly. So I drink a lot of my own coffee. So by the time that I'm like but like, I say that, but at home, like I drink a lot of my own coffee as like a form of like quality control.
Hmm.
It's not because I'm like, I only want to drink my own coffee, but it's like, I want to see how my coffee performs on my shitty home setup, on my shitty home water. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very holistic in that way. It's like, it's intentional that I'm just like, it's not me just drinking my coffee. It's like me seeing like, okay, if I grind it this way and dose it this way, how does it feel on like this Bonavita or my like little crappy espresso machine that I have at home? Because that's, it's been a big part of like our roasting philosophy is making sure the coffee tastes good at home as well as at
Hmm.
cafes, which we get, not, I wouldn't say flack for, but like some people are like, oh, it's like a little more developed than I thought it would be. And it's just like, well, yeah, it's a lot easier to work with though. Um, but but yeah, so
Do you
I think
use
it's,
tap water when you brew at home?
I filter it. I use like a
Okay.
Brita filter. We're blessed in Nova Scotia with like relatively soft water. So it just really needs like you can mess around with it a lot more if you want to, but in terms of like hardness, if you just put it through a Brita, it's like almost the perfect like kind of like I think it's like what 50 to 80 ppm or whatever is like the range. So it's like the good range, and then you just have to. We have a decent amount of like chlorine in our water, so you really got to take that out because that
Hmm.
will just like suck all the flavor and make it really one dimensional. So at the cafes, I use like a BWT style filter, and then at home, I just use like a Brita, and it does a good job.
Yeah, Montreal water is rock hard. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
You gotta
run
treat
it
it
through
well.
I run it through a Brita, but I still find that sometimes I'll catch lime scaling
Oh, really?
in my fellow kettle. So you don't want
Yeah.
that.
No, it's annoying. You can always go do the old. I've been like messing around more with like making your own water, which has been super unique. We had
Okay.
like an AeroPress competition here a little while ago, and a couple of my friends were in it. Jay Buston, who he won our East Coast one, and then like went and placed third in Calgary for like Canada, which is sick. So
Hmm.
that's like our
Yeah.
first like kind of like East Coaster like killing it in the competitive scene there. But he was messing around with his AeroPress recipe, and him and Miles Hanks, who's another like used to be a roaster for Hale, and now he's opening his own cafe here in Nova Scotia.
Sick.
Yeah, he's rad dude, but they're kind of like making their own water for this very specific coffee. And I was like, I was gonna enter the competition, but ended up having to pull out. And I just like couldn't do anything with the coffee. I was like, man, this tastes so like, like this, and I can't like work my way around it. And then they messed with their water and kind of like added certain minerals to it and just like completely changed the profile. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I knew like water was important, but I never really messed with it that much before.
Right.
It was really unique to see. So I've been playing around with that, and like it just makes me so nervous, like knowing that's a thing and like sending my coffee out across the like all of Canada and be like I have no idea what this is going to taste like in BC or Montreal or Toronto. Because like I remember like when Subtext first started roasting, and they're sending us coffee, and Alex would text me being like, how does it perform on the cat, like what's it taste like without water, like because they opened a cafe here briefly, and so he had a lot of time messing with our water because he's really into it. But yeah, so it's always such a unique thing, like figuring out how your water is going to affect your coffee, and then like how other people's water is going to affect the coffee. It can make it taste completely different. It's stupid.
That's one thing that I kind of learned during the pandemic. I dove back into the coffee because I hadn't had a barista job in, like 8 years or so.
Yeah.
And so I dove back in, and I remember I lived around the corner from this place called Structure. And we started talking about water one day. And I was like, what the fuck do you mean water? Like you make your own water. And then he was like, oh no, like we take distilled water and then we add in like certain minerals to get the taste. I was like, are you kidding me? Like
Yeah.
there's that variable too. So I haven't messed around with it because I never have the room to keep a gallon of uh, distilled water in my fridge. But
Yeah.
I know the third wave water is like a big thing um, as well in the community.
Yeah.
It's just very easy to use.
Yeah. The way I feel about it as a roaster though is like, and like even in my cafe, it's like again, we're fortunate in Nova Scotia that we have like pretty decent water from the get-go. But like when I do my cupping, like I know some roasteries will like, cup with very specific water that will make their coffee taste really, really good. But I'm like, well, my coffee should taste good with like our standard, like, filtered tap water in Nova Scotia. Like it should be an achievable thing. Like, sure, we can
Mm-hmm.
make it better if we use better water. But like, if I'm only tasting my coffee in this one, like really specific circumstance, it's not a very fair outlook to my customers, right? It's like you have to
Yeah.
think of like, your coffee in the most specialty sense, but you also have to think of it in like a lowest common denominator sense of like pre-ground. Not that like I can do anything to make pre-ground, brewed French press any better than it's going to be, but like, you get the point.
Yeah. And I think that to say in a competition setting, very different case,
Yeah.
do everything you can to stand out and get the gold. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're just taking a fucking natural Colombian home.
Good luck.
This isn't the World Barista Championship.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that's the thing is like, and that was one of my frustrations before I started roasting is like the amount of coffees I'd have at the cafe and they'd be phenomenal. And then I'd take them home and I'd just get nothing out of them because they're just so tightly developed. Like
right.
there's just no wiggle room in them. And it's like, yeah, you really get that like, high performance light roast at the cafe. But like if I don't have like 80 millimeter burrs that are like perfectly sharp to extract that, it's like I'm just not getting anything out of it. And I find that frustrating, especially it's like in Nova Scotia where it's like I know, generally people aren't like their coffee setups are pretty like average. You know what I mean? It's just like it is what like my coffee setup's average at home. Like we're not spending thousands of dollars. We got rent to pay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like I think the deepest it goes is like maybe a V60 and a kettle, right? Like,
Well, I mean, I say that there are some people with some wild setups around here, but like they're the small percentage.
yeah. I even feel like in Montreal, a lot of people, because of that European like pool, there's a lot of the still like espresso culture, and I say that intentionally.
Yeah.
So I that's why I respect the hell out of like Andy at the Roasting Society doing like the supermarket for coffee essentially. And like Zab and all these guys where they're putting an emphasis on selling you the equipment. And even like when you go to their shop and you say, I'm wanting to do this, then they're really quick to point you in the right direction. I really appreciate like these guys that are really, really nice about getting people away from the espresso macchiato, like into the, this is what, a pour over tastes like, or this is what a good filter coffee tastes like. And not just an Americano. Americanos are terrible. Stop drinking them. And if you have filter coffee, do not offer me that as like a substitute. Okay. Just give me a cortado. Like stop. Americanos
I don't know, man.
are bad.
You can make some tasty Americanos.
Can
like,
you though?
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude. Well, I mean, because to me, it's like, so I used to be anti-Americano, but then I stopped but that's because it was always like 12-ounce Americanos, but like drop it down to like 6 ounces, like 6 to 8 ounces. And it's just like, to me, I think of it in the same way as whiskey, right? It's like, if you are drinking whiskey, it's too high proof. You can't like maybe really tough guys can drink it straight, but if it's really high proof, like you need to dilute it and it opens up the flavors.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the same way with espresso, it's like espresso is really concentrated and sometimes it can be like you can taste a lot, but it's like sometimes if you just open it up a little bit, it expands. Like I feel like, there's been a while where it's like people were like, espresso needs to be this specific thing. And if you go outside of that realm, it's bad. It's over extracted. I'm like, well, no, it's just like a different concentration. That's how I like to I think a lot about my coffee extraction is not necessarily like too weak or too strong. I'm like, how concentrated is it? You know what I mean? And so it's like, if I want this espresso format and this espresso style of extraction and flavor, but I want it less concentrated, what's my best way to get there? I know doing like Allongés, again, they can be really good if you do them properly, but it's not my favorite way to extract because you tend to get a lot more bitterness out of the overwashed coffee.
Right.
But pulling a nice shot of espresso and then controlling the amount of water you put into it, like 4-ounce like Americano, 5-ounce Americano, it's gonna have all the good flavors of that Americano, or like that espresso extraction. It's just gonna be like more diluted, and I love that. My roastery manager Kelly is a big fan of Americanos, and that they're the one who's kind of like turned me into them because like, yeah, you just make them properly. I think it's like don't over dilute it, get them small, and like have it be with a good coffee, and it's gonna taste good. Like in my mind,
it does make sense.
Yeah,
when you put it that way. Like the whiskey comparison, I think is very, very spot on. Because there are those espressos where it's a little punchy, too punchy.
It's a little punchy. Yeah, just throw just a little bit of hot water in there, just like, and then it's like you got something to sip for a minute too. Like I don't know. Yeah, so I've been playing around with that more too, and that's like something I believe Matt Perger was doing for a lot of like quality control stuff back in the day with like early barista hustle things. Was he was like doing cuppings with espresso where it's like he would pull really really tight espressos like 20 to 40 in a set amount of time and then dilute them with the exact amount of water and then like pass them around for people to cup, and that's how he was doing like some espresso QC. So I've
That's
like
crazy.
yeah, it's just like because it's just a different way to look at the extraction, right, without a paper filter, without under pressure, stuff like that. So to me, I think like they can taste good, but I think if you add 12 ounces of water to anything, it's going to be over diluted. Same with a latte, right? Like,
Yeah, it's too much milk.
yeah, give it a try next time. You see a fun, funky coffee, be like, I'm gonna have that. Can I have like a 4 or 5 ounce Americano? Just
I
like
did. So I went to Cafe Leo yesterday, which is the Zab.
nice.
Yeah, love those guys. The they had the Mauricio Salaveria on espresso, which is it was like a natural El Salvador. I have it that I've been dripping on my V60 and love it. So good.
Hmm.
Like so much like raspberry and kind of like tart, like sour, but mixed with like a dark chocolate. Very, very good.
Nice.
On espresso, I was like, I gotta try this. I'm sure it tastes wild. And I got it. And to me, it almost tasted under extracted. It
Hmm.
was a little too like high on the bright side.
Yep.
And so when you say add 2 ounces of water to it,
Oh yeah,
I feel like
little
it could have just completely cleaned it up.
for sure. I think so. Because I mean, even like just like those like sour under extracted flavors can be so intense sometimes on the palate, and like they'll still espresso extraction's weird, so it still might not necessarily translate it into full sweetness, but it can help round it out and just like
Right.
mellow it out. You can't fix a badly pulled shot with it. Like if it's a bad shot, it's a bad shot. Not that saying that that was a bad shot,
No,
but
no,
like
no.
you can take like something that's like maybe a little too intense for your palate and tone it down a bit, which is
Yeah.
like completely fine. Like I think a lot of people feel like oh no, like I got to tough through this shot, and it's like you don't really need to. Like if having a little bit more water to make it more palatable is good, like it doesn't mean anything is bad with the coffee or bad with you. It's just like a preference.
Just enjoy it. Just enjoy
Yeah,
your coffee. You don't have
yeah,
to, it shouldn't be a struggle, right?
yeah, exactly.
um, I kind of want to go into why you decided to open up a roaster and what like was there a challenge that was kind of unforeseen? Because I know you've been in the industry for a long time. So what's been like one of the bigger challenges that you didn't really expect that you've kind of had to like figure out the way through?
Yeah. Um, so like I said, like I've worked in coffee most of my adult life, well, all of my adult life really, like, had other jobs too, but I really enjoyed the coffee roasting side of the world. Like I managed cafes, I had done training, I've kind of like had every little job around a cafe you could have, and I love that. But then when I got to the roastery and like I was like diving deep into coffees and getting to learn about like the roasting process and then like the buying process and everything like that, I was like, oh, like this is my brain is like lit likes this. And so when I left the roasting world, I knew I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna get back to this. Like I'm gonna store all these memories, remember how to do everything, and I'm gonna want to do this myself someday. But it's like I also knew like I guess like I had made the decision at that point in my life. I was like, okay, like I'm not going to go to school. I'm not going to get like a formal education and get like a quote unquote real job. I'm going to like try and like, open my own business and make a run at the coffee industry. It's like I already had like what was arguably one of the better paying jobs in Nova Scotia for coffee, being like a head roaster, and it was not a lot of money. And so I was like, all right, if I want to make a run at this, like I need to open my own business because that's how you'll make more money. I mistakenly thought. Um, Here we are 8 years later. No, but so like me and my like partner at the time had been doing a lot of pop-ups and little cafe things like that, and you know started our own business as a dairy bar and then a cafe because that just was like the logical way to do things. Like we had kind of made ourselves up in the food and beverage industry.
Mhm.
Um, but then like back in my mind was like I always wanted to get back to the coffee roasting and like but it seemed like such a barrier, like like having like roasters are tons of money, like having the space to do it, buying the green coffee. It's like there's a very big capital step to jump into it in a way and that can be profitable and like sustainable. Like, yeah, you can buy like a little like, 1 pound roaster and like start like with one bag of green, but it's like that's not how I wanted to do it because I already had that experience of like
Right.
roasting on a proper roaster, having like a full menu of coffees to pick from. I knew that like if I was going to do it and make it sustainable for myself, I had to hit these certain marks. Um, but for a long time, I just, especially with COVID too, I was just like, oh man, like, you know, you're already struggling with two businesses. It's like, probably never going to really happen. But I had a trip to Montreal, oddly enough, to eat what it was called East Coast Coffee Madness, was like a coffee event that used to be put on there. And I just got to meet like so many amazing roasters and so many cool like coffee professionals. It like this is right around the time when like Quietly and Luna and Seth Taylor were all like starting like kind of year one, year two, and like just getting to chat with them and see that how they started their businesses of just like Luna was renting equipment from so and so and like Quietly kind of was head roaster for Sam James and started his own thing, and just seeing how they could start small and like work their way up and like make their little edge in the industry because again, like looking in, it feels so saturated. You're just like, what do I have to offer this industry that's already so, it's got every niche already covered, right?
Mhm.
But then seeing like, oh, like no, these people are figuring out new ways to do something unique in an already really saturated industry and being really, really successful in their own way because they're like keeping their format small, keeping it tight. So after that trip, I was like reinvigorated, and like actually getting to go chat with Andy at CRS was a big part of that too, because I was starting to like hunt down spaces that I could rent to roast, being like, oh, like, can I use your roaster? Can I use your roaster? And but then that was during COVID, so nobody was renting out space.
Right.
And like Nova Scotia is a really small market too, so I don't think people are too friendly to the idea of like me starting a roastery because like, yeah, it's gonna steal from other people's business.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that kind of gave it on my scent, and I was starting to try to figure out more. My brother, who works in film, has always been a big like coffee nerd and like super passionate into it, and wanted to like kind of invest in the project and like believed in me to be able to do it. And so he kind of has been like my partner in it on that side. Um, and so it just kind of, as things seem to happen, sometimes a lot of things kind of magically fell together. Like talked to Doug from Vintage Coffee Roasters about finding a coffee roaster. He knew Zab was selling theirs, so I contacted Edwin, and kind of things all fell together. And it's funny too, actually, because like there was a point where I had given it up, and then one of my staff at the cafe were just like always bugging me about it. They're like, "You should open a roastery. You should open a roastery." She kept on sending me like links to use. She's like, "I used to work for this guy. He's selling his roaster. Like, you should buy it." And like my joke to her is like, you started all of this. Like I opened this roastery because you kept bugging me, and then you work somewhere else now. So she just never actually came by the roastery, which I always think is really funny. But yeah, so I think like circle back to like the actual question, like challenges and stuff like that. I mean, there's been a lot of like logistical challenges, I think, that have been like the biggest things, like just figuring out the permitting, figuring out like the flow and like the things you're like, yeah, just setting up any kind of business, new business in Nova Scotia is always challenging. There's some things that have been like shockingly more easy than I expected, which is great. I feel like having the pedestal of Cafe Good Luck and just like the reputation that I've been able to like build up as like a coffee person in Nova Scotia has served us really well.
Mhm.
And then just knowing like the ultimate secret to being a good coffee roastery is just buying good coffee and putting it in front of people. Like that's the thing. I think everyone like they really like in like like obviously like branding's important and like the way you present yourself and stuff like that. But like at the end of the day, I was like, I just gotta work with good people, buy good coffee, and start building those relationships up, and like, and then that's how we'll flourish. And I think like, I've been very, I cast wide nets out when we first started. Lots of different importers, lots of different coffee samples, and now I'm like working with fewer and fewer as like people who I know are kind of like very sincerely into it for the right reasons and bringing in
Mhm.
great coffee. And that's like I think is the big differential I see between us and like other Nova Scotian roasters. Is just like the style of menu that we have and the specificity of like the coffee that we bring in. And I think people really connect with that because like all coffee is kind of expensive now. So it's like, if you're going to be paying 25 bucks for a bag of coffee, it's like you should be able to know exactly what's in it, when it was roasted, and like kind of be able to get a little bit more out of it than just like the bag of coffee, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree. The value, like, what is it? People want to be able to buy into like what you're doing,
Yeah,
and when they sense like the passion behind the product, I feel like they're much more quick to buy
for
in and
sure.
become some sort of loyalist to that brand. So yeah, I
Well,
mean
that's the
that's
thing. And there's so many amazing stories behind producers and like, you know, in their lives and stuff like that. And it's really, it feels like a great privilege as like a coffee roaster to be able to one, like work with these people in a relatively direct way, but also learn more about them and then like, you know, help support a lot of like, well, actually, the way I think about it and explain it to a lot of people is like I compare it to like your local food industry. Like, in Nova Scotia, we have a huge thing for like buy local, support local farmers and stuff like
mhm,
that. And that's how I compare direct trade coffee or working with like single producers or small community producers is like I'm using my money as a global trading partner to support as local as I can. Because it's like if you just buy like a regional blend, it's like that money is getting spread out amongst a huge region. And like,
right.
it's probably a buyer who's buying cherry or green at like X price. And so like maybe those producers aren't getting very much money for their coffee, but then this guy is taking a little bit more. But it's like if you can work with people who are really specific and isolated to small areas and they can tell you exactly what they're paying per cherry or per like a green coffee pound, it's like that like you're maximizing your purchase to go to the right people.
Right.
And that's kind of like in the same way. It's like if I go to the farmer's market and I buy my produce from XYZ farmer, it's like I know my money's going directly to them as opposed to like going to a superstore and buying grown in Canada produce. It's like, great, it's Canadian produce, but like who's Canadian produce? So that's like kind of like a lot of our like my buying philosophy too. It's just like, support as local as you can in a sense of like know your specific region, know your specific people who are getting the money, whether that be a community lot, a single producer lot, or a regional blend.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Amen. We haven't talked about music at all.
No.
So I feel like a good way to get that checked off is the Big Riffer.
Yeah.
Botfly have become some pretty good friends of mine. Every time they come into town, it's just a great hangout. And so last time they came through, they had originally I had the Bots blend from, was it Receiver that did it?
Yep. Yeah. Chris did
Uh,
that.
which was really, really good. But I know that the last time they came through, they were super stoked because you had done that blend for them. Where it wasn't even a blend; it was just a straight up Peruvian, right?
Yep. Yeah. It was that was Samuel Jimenez's coffee, I believe, from Cajamarca in Peru. So like northern Peru.
Mm-hmm. It was really, really good. Like very surprising because I'm not usually a big Peruvian drinker. I know why they went Peruvian, and it's because I think Keegan and maybe Sean are very, very like diner oriented coffee people.
Yeah.
Bab seems to be the more adventurous one when it comes to
Yeah.
coffee, but that could be because of the roasting background. But tell me a bit like musically, did you grow up going to shows? Are you a heavy person
Oh
or
yeah. I am like very varied in my music tastes, and I'm a dabbler. I'd say like I always fear conversations with people who are like diehard like any kind of music fan because I'm like
Mhm.
I love the periphery of like certain music industries that are very esoteric. You know what I mean? Like I like to just like dip my toes and be like, that's cool. I have like these three bands that I like for this, and then I'm like, I'm gonna start phasing out.
Yeah.
And like, but like when I grew up, like when I was like 14, 15, I used to go to like the local hardcore shows, like Get Tested and Risky Business, and like other local bands too. But like those hardcore shows were so much fun back then. And like any other kid, like I had my gateway bands like Linkin Park and POD and stuff like that. That kind of like
POD.
got
Yes.
classic.
Love them.
Um, and then I'm trying to like I think my first time like actually listening to like a really heavy band was probably Under Oath. And it was they were in a Greg Hastings paintball game, and it was just like the intro song to it was like reinventing your exit, and they had like the video in the paintball game. And I just remember watching that video as like a 14-year-old kid and be like, this is sick.
I totally
And
forgot about that.
yeah, yeah. And so that was my introduction to like screamo and like, more like get like diving into more hardcore bands after that. Because like, back then it's like I went to these shows, but there was no way of like listening to these bands otherwise. Like I guess I could have bought their CDs and stuff, but I don't even remember there being CDs, like if they even recorded and stuff like that. So, and like maybe you go on their MySpace, but like some of this was before MySpace. But yeah, so I remember, and I remember going to like HMV to go buy the CD, and like with my parents and like putting it in, and them just being like, "What the fuck?" And I was just like, "No, this is great. Keep it on. I love this."
1 minute in, and it's like you're gonna listen to that by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like that's kind of like I feel like where I spent a lot of my time was like that screamo emo scene, like bands like Thursday and like uh yeah, like stuff like that. It was just
like early Taking Back Sunday, brand
yeah,
new.
exactly,
Yeah.
brand new, yeah, stuff like that, and like Alexis on Fire, obviously,
Hell yeah.
and bands like that. So
We were literally, we were like doing a songwriting session yesterday, and for some reason we got on about Alexis, and we were like, first 3 albums, fucking amazing. No misses, like no skips. But then after that, it's just bad.
what so that'd be like Up to Crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you re-listened to Old Crows recently though?
No, and I'll be honest, after like the first, I think, album, maybe the second one, I completely dropped off because I went way heavier, like deathcore.
Yeah, that's
So
fair. Like the sound definitely changed in my first couple listens to like the Old Crows album specifically, because I was kind of like when they're hitting a little bit more mainstream.
mhm.
Like I was like, oh, I don't like it. Like they changed, but then I turned like 30 and I was like, oh no, I kind of get it. Because like the whole album, I feel like is them like singing about like, yeah, we're not the kids we used to be, and that's like I think the lyrics like we're not the kids we used to be, like we're different now, and but no, so I do like that album, but like obviously like the self-titled and Watch Out are like peak, so
Have
fucking
you,
good.
were you a Census Fail person?
No,
Okay.
yeah,
Because there's a band called Koyo from Long Island
okay,
that is very much like, it's like the continuation of that Long Island, like post-hardcore emo kind of scene. But then I figured out that they just sound exactly like Census Fail, especially like their first release, which I was not a huge Census Fail fan growing up, but I was huge Taking Back Sunday, brand new. There's another one in there that I'm missing, but like very much like almost pop punk, like really
yeah,
fast, but with like clean melodic singing. So
yeah.
if you're ever wanting to just dabble into what's out there right now, you should listen to Koyo.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Koyo. So good.
I'll write it up.
I've seen them like 4 times.
Sick. All right, I'll look it up.
Um,
Oh, one
yeah,
sec, my dog might start barking. Get
that's okay.
the cats and dogs. They're still figuring it out. They just moved into each other, so. But
We love a dog. We love a cat.
but yeah, but no, like I've always loved music, hardcore music especially, or like that kind of realm of heavier music has always been in my life. Oh, there he goes.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Did the cat turn around and just start popping him? Is that what?
It's kind of like he will, yeah. Like I have two cats and a dog, and one cat just hides, and the other cat just gets in his face and will just like start batting his nose, and it's
Love
always
it.
great to watch. Um, but yeah, no, like especially the local music scene was like anytime we had shows, like I loved going there. I love getting in the pit and just like having fun, and like
Mhm.
I love having friends that are in the music scene too. Like I didn't really know anyone in it until I started working with Babs, and that was back when Sleep. I guess no, he wasn't in Sleep Shaker. What was his band's name? Bonesaw. Yeah,
Oh
back
yeah,
in the
Bones.
Bonesaw days. And so like
Bonesaw is ready.
yeah, geez, so funny. So I started getting to go to those guys' shows, and that was a lot of fun. And but yeah, it's just I love the energy and like
Mhm.
yeah. But
So who, when it came to making the coffee for them, were they like very specific did they just give you taste that they were looking for and like left it up to you or?
It, like I wish it was a bit more of an involved a bit more of an involved process, but we picked a coffee that was on the menu that they liked, and we bagged it up for them. We turned this around in like 1 to 2 days, like
Mhm.
because like Keegan came by the roastery and was chatting, and then like Kelly was like, "You got any coffee for the road?" And Keegan's like, "Nah, man, I really dropped the ball on it." Like he's like, "I really wanted to do it with you guys this time, but he's like, I just don't feel like," or he's like, "I just didn't get." He's like, "Well," Kelly's like, "If you can get us a label by tomorrow." 1 second. He's also like a 120-pound dog. He's just massive. So, but yeah, but yeah. So Keegan was at the roastery, and Kelly was just like, if you can get us a label by tomorrow, like we can bag it up for you and send it to tour. So Paul Atwood, who's been on tour with them, did the label design and sent it to us
Nice.
like the next day, and we just ripped up I think we did like 100 bags for them, and they took it all down the states and stuff like that. So yeah, so that Peru was actually our big sipper at the time, which you kind of said that diner vibe. So like the big sipper to me is like my ideal crushable everyday coffee. So
Yes.
like I source different regions in that coffee, but I always kind of have the same profile in mind where it's going to be like medium in acidity is what I go for, and then like big sweetness and really crushable. I won't like I'll allow floral notes, but I don't want anything like too crazy florally in there that'll be
Hmm.
like make people think too hard. I just want something that's just like, it's got that stone fruit, it's got that chocolate, maybe a bit of nuttiness, but like, it's not Brazil focused nuttiness. It's more that clean almondy note. So yeah,
It's a cozy cup.
it's cozy cup. Exactly. That's all we want.
Yeah, I was very stoked because I think that they stopped in Montreal like their first date on that tour
Yeah.
because they always stay with Dwayne. But basically, like we were talking about it, and they were like, "Oh, we have the bags, like all this stuff," and so they like handed me a bag like as we were kind of parting ways. I was very very happy. But then once I tried it, I was like, "Oh, yo, like they weren't joking. Like Keegan wasn't joking." And so I was very happy with this collaboration. The
Nice.
anchored one was, I mean, the receiver one was good. Like it was really good, but the blend on it was like maybe a little too of that traditional focus
Yeah,
that
I think he did like half Brazil, half Colombia or something like that. Like kind of like I think similar to his receiver blend. Like,
mhm.
but
It was a little too cozy for me.
yeah,
But the Peruvian was like spot on.
yeah, I love
Complex,
Peruvian coffee.
still complex enough to keep me interested, but then I was like very familiar, very good.
Yeah,
So yeah, I love seeing collaborations done, especially when it's like friends doing things with friends. Like that's my favorite.
oh, it's the
And
best.
in metal, it seems like there's been a lot of these brands pop up that are like metal oriented. And I'm not going to
Yeah,
name names. I'm not going to say who, but it's not traceable. And I've tried to dive deep and trace some of these like bigger name metal band coffee blends and things, and it's really scary. So if you're listening and you want to do this, please go to a local person, maybe somebody you're friends with, and make the coffee with them. Do not go to insert big coffee name with metal label here and have
yeah,
them make your coffee because we have no idea where it's coming from and it may not be ethical. So please don't do
bizarre.
that. Please go
Yeah,
local.
yeah. Go local. Know what's going into it, and know how much the farmer was paid.
Yes. If you don't know what farm it came from, don't put it out.
Yeah.
Just don't drink it, maybe. Like let's just say don't.
Well, again, it's a very complex subject. Like not all coffee is farm specific, so we don't want a blanket statement. Some coffee is going to be, there's always going to be commodity coffee. There's always going to be regional coffees that aren't going to be traceable to farm.
Right.
And that's fine to a degree too, but it's like you still have to make sure there's like, proper farm gate prices paid, and like
Mm-hmm.
the buy-in is still ethical and traceable to at least a station that's like has a good reputation for buying the coffee properly. Like, but because for example, like Ethiopia, like my current Ethiopia is 1,800 producers in it, right? Because they're all small lot. They
Mm-hmm.
have like coffee gardens around their house. They bring it off to the washing station. and they get paid per cherry, and then the washing station processes the coffee, right? So there's like a lot of nuance to the buy-in. So we
Right.
shouldn't say like
That's
blanket it, but like
right.
there's a degree of transparency that should be expected with like every coffee, and like I think like if people aren't showing you that, or like it's just like either they don't know or like they're not proud of it. So which it's both bad.
Yeah, it's just not good. Yeah, the whole I don't even want to the washing station thing. It's too long of a conversation. But I love that. I love like the whole co-op idea, especially in like Ethiopia, and Kenya does a lot of like the co-op stuff as well. It's just very, very cool. Like the little like some old lady's growing coffee and she brings it and just makes like a little extra. It's so cool. But I mean, that's where coffee came from. So, well, Sonny, I feel like we've chatted for a long time and I don't want to take up too much more of your Sunday morning. I know you got somewhere to be, but I really appreciate you hanging out and deep diving with me on this journey.
Yeah, no, this has been it's been really fun to chat with you, and like I know we didn't get too much into music stuff, but that's fine. That's not my specialty anyway. But yeah,
it's fine. I was just very excited to talk with like somebody who has basically started their roaster, and just hearing about like that journey is, I feel like I don't get enough of those people. And so hearing about it, I can really get lost in that, but maybe we'll have to do a round two and really get into the music side, or we'll do a catch up whenever I come to the Maritimes. We'll do maybe a little bit here.
Yeah, like maybe we can do a little beans and breakdown coffee, and you can roast it yourself. Hand on the dial.
I will never say no to that.
There you go.
There it is. Or we'll do a little cupping, like you mentioned. It's gonna be a great time, and I really hope that everything works out like on that side. So but like I said, it's been a pleasure. I just have one last question for you before we go. What's your favorite city for beans and breakdowns?
My favorite city for beans and breakdowns, like in terms, like where to get coffee and where to get music. I mean, I gotta say Halifax. We got good coffee, we got Botfly, got good tunes. It's a pretty good scene down here, and to be honest, it's all I know.
It's very home, like everyone I meet, like musically, it's like everybody knows each other and it's all friends. Yeah. And it's like a little family. Yeah. Montreal's so big.
Montreal is so big. It's like you walk for like 30 minutes in Halifax or Dartmouth, you're not there anymore. You walk for 30 minutes in Montreal, you're just like, you walk for 5 hours in Montreal, you're still in Montreal. It's wild to me.
If you go east to west, yeah. But if you go like north to south, you can do it in like 2 hours, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. So, you do that here, you're like in Sackville.
You're basically out of Nova Scotia.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, well, that's great. I can't wait to experience Halifax. Like I'm very, very excited. I've been telling my wife and everybody, we've just been talking about like the food. My guitarist has been there on tour a few times and he's like, I know the best place to get the fish and chips. So we're like, we're very, very, we're a food band. So
sick, dude. We'll have to go out for dinner when you guys come around.
It'll be great. And sick. I know that Botfly, and we're doing it with Pale Lake. This hasn't been like completely announced, but we'll be doing the one with Pale Lake. And those guys are great as well. So
yeah, we love Pale Lake.
But yeah, can't wait to get out there, catch up, see the roastery and all that.
Yeah, that'd be sick, man. You let me know.
Take it easy. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
All right. Cheers, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beans and Breakdowns. I want to say a huge thanks to Sonny for hanging out on the podcast. Be sure to check out the link to the website of Have Fun Coffee in the description. Order something. They have great merch, great coffee. Show some support if you can. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. You can find out more information about the podcast by following us on Instagram at Beans and Breakdowns or on the web at beansandbreakdowns.com. Until next week, be sure to stay caffeinated and wake the fuck up.